What do you think of when you hear the word legacy? Wouldn't we all like to be remembered well? In today's Dining Room Devo, Peter alludes to great women of the past and describing how wives can honor God by honoring their husbands. We're looking at 1 Peter 3, verses 5 and 6, but I want to go back to verses 3 and 4 for context. It says, "Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her master. You are her daughters, if you do what is right and do not give way to fear." In verses 3 and 4 that we looked at last time, Peter said that a woman's true beauty is not found in beautiful clothes or made-up faces, but in a Christ-like spirit. Peter says in verse 5, he refers to holy women of the past, and he doesn't mention all of these women that he's referring to. He only mentions Sarah by name. But some of the women he's referring to no doubt were beautiful and may have even been described as such in Scripture, but the legacy they left was not through their appearance, but through their character. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about some of these Old Testament heroines. First of all, he refers to Sarah. Now, Sarah apparently had exquisite physical beauty because in the book of Genesis it records that when she was in her 80s, she was still so attractive that a king wanted to marry her. Peter says that Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him her master. Now, Peter isn't telling us that in 2020 that wives should call their husbands master. What he's doing is he's given an example of how these Old Testament women showed respect and submission to their husbands. At the time, it was the cultural norm for women to call their husbands master. Sarah showed internal strength and outward respect towards Abraham. How? Well, we're not really told much about Sarah's life and some of the decisions that she made, but we do know that when God told Abraham to leave the country where he and Sarah grew up, she went with him. Now, Abraham heard from God. God spoke clearly to Abraham, and some people may have considered Abraham crazy for claiming to hear from God. But Sarah was supportive of her husband. And that led to great things that eventually led to the birth of Isaac when Sarah was 90 and when Abraham was 100. Isaac was the son that God had promised. Sarah was supportive of her husband. Another woman that Peter may have been referring to was Hannah. Now, Hannah was the mother of Samuel, and her story is given in 1 Samuel. She was childless, had no children, and because of that, she put up with a lot of abuse from her husband's other wife. But Hannah showed gentleness and quietness. She showed meekness, like we talked about last time, in that she didn't retaliate against Peninnah when she was abused. Instead, she cried out to God and asked for his mercy. She was Christ-like and trusted in God for his grace and mercy, and she wasn't disappointed because God eventually gave Hannah a son, and she dedicated him to God's service. Her son was Samuel, who became one of the greatest of the Old Testament prophets. Hannah is worth honoring. In fact, we still honor her today. How? I've known several women named Hannah in my life. How many Peninnahs do you know? A third example of a godly woman that Peter may have been referring to was Ruth. Now, Ruth, whose story is recorded in the book of Ruth, she honored her husband after he died by taking care of his mother. And as the book of Ruth goes on, she shows humility and she shows a dedication to hard work. She shows a lot of wisdom. She had a gentle and quiet spirit in that she didn't try to draw a lot of attention to herself. But eventually other people noticed her and they wanted to take care of her because of her character. A man named Boaz saw the character in Ruth and decided to marry her. And through the family that they produced, King David was eventually born. By mentioning Sarah and referring to others, Peter is demonstrating that the advice he's given women is grounded in tradition. The gentleness and quietness he's described has been the pattern of godly wives for centuries. So in a larger passage we've looked at the last few weeks about showing respect for others, Peter encourages women to show respect as these biblical heroines had done. In verse 6, Peter says that you are her, that is Sarah's daughters, if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Now, what does Peter mean by giving way to fear? Why won't these ladies in the first century that Peter's writing to give way to fear? Well, it's because they have the same hope that Sarah and these other godly women had. The hope that God controls their destinies, that God will honor them for seeking to honor him. They don't need to be afraid because God is in control. And all three of the ladies that we've talked about loved God, and they served him humbly. And their love for God showed through their gentle and quiet spirit. And in the end, God honored each of them with a godly legacy. You may know modern examples of the kind of woman that Peter describes here. My grandma Miller was one of them. She was a humble woman, nurturing, joyful. She taught me a lot about Jesus, and I know she prayed for me every day. And the truth is, I may not be in ministry today if not for her spiritual influence. Peter's point in verses 3 through 6 is that women, and really men too, we shouldn't look for short-term attention. Instead, we should live to leave a godly legacy. Thanks for watching our video. Feel free to like it or leave a comment. Visit us at newparisfirst.com. We'll see you next time on Dining Room Devos with Pastor Jeff Estep. May God bless you and your family.